All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining our 18th Sochology Edu series. We're excited to be joined by a very special guest today who will be talking about common product misconceptions. My name is Mudassir Bungish, and I'll be your host for today's session. And I'm joined by Amna, our technical director. So we have two product Soch cafes happening in major cities in Pakistan. The first one is tomorrow in Karachi at Catalyst Labs. The second one is in Lahore on the 30th of May at DevSync. So go to our Product Soch LinkedIn page to get more details and register. Now, whether you're joining us from LinkedIn or YouTube, please post your questions into the chat and we'll bring them up either during or towards the end of the session. Welcome, Chris, and thank you for joining this session.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so just a bit of an intro about Chris, and I had to trim this down a bit since Chris has so far had a very illustrious career. Chris is a CS grad from Stanford and has spent over 30 years building and leading product teams that define new product categories at startups to Fortune 500 software companies, including Lookout, Symantec, and Vontu. A holder of multiple patents, he's discovered and developed new products in consumer and enterprise, mobile, web, data, and platform services. Since joining SVPG, Chris has worked directly with over 200 companies ranging from startups to very large enterprises across a wide variety of technologies, business models, and industries. Chris has worked directly with leadership and operational teams at these companies to better align their organization, process, tools, and culture with modern product best practices. Before joining Silicon Valley Product Group, Chris was the VP of Product for Lookout and Head of Product for Vontu, which was acquired by Symantec. At both companies, he built the product organization from the ground up and led the effort to discover and deliver multiple category-leading products. Today, his topic is common product misconception. So, Chris, it's a pleasure to have you. Over to you.
Great. Thanks so much. And thanks for the generous introduction. I hope I can live up to all of that. So I'm Chris. I'm at Silicon Valley Product Group. Some of you may have heard of Silicon Valley Product Group. We've been around for a little while. We're actually a very small consultancy. There are only about a half a dozen partners in the practice. I've been in the practice for 9 years now, so since 2015, and it's the longest job I've ever had. And it has been fantastic. Like all of the other partners in SVPG, as you heard in the introduction, I've been a head of product at a number of companies. Some of those were B2B companies, some of those were B2C companies. For some reason, they all seem to cluster around security for me. I'm not really necessarily a security guy. I never considered myself that, but a lot of the companies where I was an operator really were that. Silicon Valley Product Group, basically, we are about what's now coming to be called the product model or the product operating model. And this is just sort of a way of organizing, a way of sort of planning product that is, sort of modern. It's the hallmark of really the best technology companies out there. And it's really, especially in the last couple of years, this has been spreading quite a bit. There are a lot of people talking about this, a lot of companies trying to adopt this. We work with companies usually in the form of kind of assessing their existing product models, bringing in a lot of training and advising and consulting on how they migrate to the new product model. We also run a lot of workshops, and in many cases, this is part of those transformations. In some cases, they're a bit more standalone. We do offer public versions of these workshops if anybody's interested in checking them out. So let me put this up here. I've got just some simple slides, just a few words on them, about this talk. So, there is a lot of enthusiasm out there for the product model. I'm going to assume that many of you have heard some of the main tenets on this. I know many of the talks, on this live stream have covered these types of things, but it has to do with driving teams around problems as opposed to giving them things to build, giving them roadmaps to build, measuring teams based on the business outcomes they're able to achieve versus, how much they ship and by when they ship it. A lot of it has to do with working collaboratively, cross-functionally. So how does engineering work together with product management, work with product design? And then, a lot of ideas in the product model have to do with de-risking your ideas using the techniques of product discovery. So a lot of stuff that sounds like really good ideas, and these are really good ideas, but it is amazing, despite how kind of tidy and easy these ideas are, how often there is confusion. Sometimes it's people new to the product model, and sometimes we find this confusion in people who think they've been working in that model for quite some time. So I'm going to start. I've got 5 of these. I actually usually talk about 10 of these, but we don't have a whole lot of time here. So I've scoped it down to the things that I think are most relevant to your audience. This is really about product managers on the ground, and a lot of it is how you relate to other parts of the process. So I'm going to start with this one. I can't tell you how frequently I hear this, and it kind of sounds good, right? Product management decides the what, engineering decides the how. And it's a nice way to sort of keep everybody in their lane and not stepping on each other's toes. And, on the product manager side, we look at engineering as, the job is to keep them focused on coding. We want to protect them from a lot of the details, the things that they just don't need to know, so that they can keep their big brains aimed at kind of how to build this stuff. We also worry on the product management side about ensuring that they just have a constant stream of stuff to work on. We don't want them to be idle. And in the worst form of this, we'll see companies that are treating engineering just as a cost center, and you see a lot of outsourcing going on there. The flip side of this, engineering, how they see themselves when you're kind of operating under this type of misconception. They've got this impossible list of things to get completed, and they're frustrated, by product management's lack of specification, lack of good requirements, lack of stories, and a general feeling that product management doesn't know what they're doing. Right? That's oftentimes what we see around this misconception. So let's flip this around a bit. Most strong companies really look at their engineers differently. Oftentimes, in terms of the what you build, your engineers are often the best source of ideas. And the reason for this, quite simply, is they know what's possible right now in a way that nobody else does. They know this, better than your customers do. They know this better than your executives do, than your sales force does, than than the product leaders do. And the problem with, that previous view of the world is we don't really even give them a chance to understand the broader context within which they can come up with these ideas. One way to look at this is if your engineers are first seeing ideas in sprint planning, that's a problem, right? They are your collaboration partners in a really deep way. So who is this guy I'm showing over my shoulder here? This is Bill Campbell. He passed away a few years ago, but he's kind of one of the most influential tech people that you probably never heard of. Some people call him the coach of Silicon Valley. He coached a lot of the big leaders that you would know. And this is one of his tenets here, that the most important thing that you can do as a leader is to empower your engineers, put themselves into a position where they can really affect the what and not just the how. I'm not going to give you any specific examples on this. There have just been countless from my own tenure as a product manager. I know that the engineers help the entire team look a lot better. And if you got yourself into a position where engineering was really bringing all of that to bear, your product is going to be much, much better. All right, there's number 1. I think, I'll just jump in here. Design. I just talked a lot about engineering and kind of the relationship of engineering and product management, but design is another one here that's often misunderstood, and that relationship in the product process. We often think of design, and here I'm talking about sort of experience design, interface design. I'm not talking about engineering design. We often see this as downstream of requirements. Product management does its job. We collect all of these requirements. Maybe we give some wireframes to the designers, and they are going to figure out how to make this look really, really good. And design is going to do some important stuff here, right? They're going to apply good heuristic principles. They're going to bring in the right sorts of design patterns, things that get the product looking cohesive, things that are consistent with the brand. This is really the common view of design. And like that common view of engineering, this one's also wrong. Really, within the product model, it is very, very different here. I've got this wonderful quote from Mr. Jobs that puts this into that kind of frame. Insofar as we're talking about design, this is really what's going on, right? That design is not what it looks and feels like. It's actually how it works. So what this means is that the typical designer is very, very forward in the process. They are actually prototyping like crazy, just constantly prototyping. Not uncommon for a designer in a product team to produce a dozen or more prototypes every week. And most of these are going to get thrown away. But the point is they are advancing the conversation, helping people think through this. I recently came across just a great story on this, on a product that I'm guessing many of you are familiar with. It's the Copilot product within GitHub. And Copilot is now sort of a concept that Microsoft is really pushing in terms of how AI and the chat GPT models are getting exposed within the various processes. But the first place it was done was within coding. So it's an AI code generation mechanism. The original experience concept was very chat-like, just like chat GPT. A developer would ask this a question, and then it would get a response. They call that an oracle, right? You ask the oracle. The problem that they had early on, though, was one with accuracy. So the responses that came back from this thing were either really good, like scary good, they would call them spooky good, or they were just crazy bad, and they would call those the kooky responses. So you'd either get things that were spooky or kooky coming out of this. And this in turn led to a real problem with their sort of chosen UI metaphor. What would happen is if somebody would use that chat thing and say, okay, what should I do here? They would get that kooky response maybe once or twice, and they'd never come back to it. So this was clearly not something that was going to work. And one of the concepts that they came up with that the design team came up with was this Copilot idea, where it looks over your shoulder at what you're doing, and then it just quietly suggests things that you might accept or just ignore, and then they're going to fade away. This, though, in turn affected the engineering requirements. So before, they were focused very much on accuracy, not so much on latency, because you could wait, right? You could tolerate a little bit of a gap between asking something and getting that response. In this case, that's not going to work. And what they had to do was really turn up the dial on latency, even at the cost of accuracy. So it got, initially it actually got a little less accurate, but that was necessary for this to work. This is very different from this idea of design being downstream of requirements. Design was making some, full-on experience decisions that themselves fed back into the requirements. So it's a different model of working. And I think the punchline of this is, if you're a product manager, that you're going to be very, very closely coordinated and connected and collaborating with your design lead.
Yeah, Chris, this is really interesting. I just recently listened to a podcast where they had Gustav from Spotify, and he was giving the example of Midjourney, right, where they had to make a decision because exactly what you said, right? The results that they were showing, 3 would be really terrible, 1 would be really great, but how do they present that, right? And so design played a really crucial part where they show you
Exactly.
all 4 very low res because they wanted to make sure that the experience was good. You didn't have to wait an hour for the pictures to load, and that's kind of helped them really iterate their models.
Yep. Perfect. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that example also just shows how integral design is to the entire process. Rather than thinking of it being downstream of requirements, it's a deep collaboration partner. All right. Number 3. So this is about the creation of the product versus the go-to-market. And the misconception here, we've got our collaborating team of product management, design, and engineering, and their job is creating the product. And it's somebody else's job, sales and marketing, to figure out the go-to-market. And, this is, so let me just define go-to-market here for those of you who haven't really kind of soaked in this term. But what this really is the path by which your customers learn about the existence of your product and then can obtain it, whether it means use it for free or buy it, or, how it gets rolled out to various people. All of that stuff is the go-to-market. And the point is, your go-to-market is just as important as the actual creation of the product. And all too often, we view that as somebody else's job. And yes, of course, it is sales and marketing's job to do this go-to-market stuff. But we on the product side can't be ignorant of this, because in many cases, it actually shapes the product that we're going to build. One of the other SVPG partners is Martina Lauchenko. She's actually a part-time SVPG partner. She focuses on the product marketing side of things, but SVPG is a bit of her side hustle. Her day job is as a venture capital partner. She works with a lot of early stage companies, in this VC portfolio, and this is something she sees over and over again, that the product market fit. They don't really think enough about the market side of it. How do you actually get this idea inserted into the market? And again, we need to know this on the product side because it can affect dramatically what we build and how we decide to build it. One really quick coarse example of this, just to show it, it's usually a lot more nuanced than this, but consider a product like Teams and a product like Slack, right? We started with Slack, Microsoft responded with Teams. They do fundamentally the same thing. They've really started to grow into some pretty different directions, but at least initially they were in the same general space. One of these had a go-to-market that was very product-led growth. Slack, its original growth, they had no sales or marketing. It was the product that propelled that growth. And the general strategy was to get it embedded in a small team within a large company, and then it would spread from there. Microsoft, on the other hand, has a go-to-market that's very much driven by a sales force, and it's very much driven by long-standing relationships with a lot of companies. Bundling is the thing that drives it. Integration with the rest of the Microsoft suite, that is the real driver, not these product-led growth forces. Well, I told you this is a very coarse example, but I hope you can see that if you're a product manager on one of these products, you cannot be ignorant of how the thing is sold and how it's actually getting into the hands of your customers. By the way, the reason I wanted to linger on this is something that we at SVPG have really started to focus on, because it really does seem to be a big misconception within a lot of especially young product managers. All right, just got a couple more here. Product managers need to be hired for their domain experience. And what this means, domain experience, means that the person has worked in that industry before. They've worked maybe, with if it's financial services, or maybe it's security, or maybe it's healthcare. And the managers of these product managers are looking for people who've worked in the industry before. And the logic here is that, look, our domain is so complex, it's going to take so long for anybody to learn this that we need to hire people who've already been working in this. Or in some cases, like with startups, you might be in a domain that you don't fully understand, and you feel like you have to hire in this expertise from the outside world in order to show us, kind of how we're going to do this. My experience and the experience of many people in product management is that this rarely works. This is rarely the right way to hire people. Experts have a hard time separating what needs to be done from what's always been done that way. Some of you may follow Shreyas Doshi. He's a product thinker. He's been really active on Twitter and developing his own, sort of content and voice over the last couple of years. If you don't follow him, I highly recommend it. This was a tweet that he put out, a few months ago that really captures it. What domain knowledge, the role that it plays, in product. I'm going to give you a quick example myself. One of the companies where I led product is a company called Vontu, which I'm guessing nobody here has heard of. The company was purchased by Symantec in 2008 or something. But at the time, this was a pretty big deal, what this company did. It defined a new market. It was a subcategory of information security called data loss prevention, DLP. So if you've ever heard of DLP, Vontu kind of named that category and created all of that. Well, so the problem, just really briefly, was about companies that have confidential data within all of their systems, and they're trying to make sure that confidential data doesn't escape and end up in a place where it's not supposed to be. We, on the founding executive team, and actually the founders themselves, had very little security experience. Actually, there were 3 co-founders. Of the 3 co-founders, only one of them had any security experience. None of the original executive team had any experience with security products. And as a result of this, we had to get smart on it, obviously. We had to learn these things really quickly, but we did not approach this as a traditional security problem. And this was the thing that allowed us to discover a very different way to deal with the technology, a very different way to present the information, and kind of integrate it into, the organization itself. Most importantly, it actually allowed us to pursue a very different go-to-market. We identified a different buying center for this sort of technology that was not the same as traditional security products. It was, in a different part of these organizations. It allowed us to up-level the value proposition. It allowed us to sell much, much higher. It allowed us to charge a lot more money for this sort of solution. And I think a lot of this was a direct result of that initial team not really having done it before and figuring this stuff out, a little bit of early naivete. Now, I am not saying you should come in and be ignorant of a domain. That is definitely not the lesson here. In order to be successful as a product manager, you have to become expert in the domain. But the point of this is that we don't necessarily want to be hiring people because of their pre-existing experience with the domain. Good product managers know how to learn a domain and get expert on it very, very quickly.
Yeah.
All right.
Just wanted to add to that as well, Chris.
Please.
Like my previous company, I mentioned before we started the session, it was a healthcare company, but we had folks come in from the banking sector, from consumer app side, right? And honestly, I thought they were much better product managers than myself, right? I mean, me having a healthcare background, because they just brought diversity of thought, just a different way of thinking about the product that, somebody who would have spent 20 years in the healthcare industry, because they're just bringing that kind of baggage with them, so to speak.
Right.
So.
Exactly. No, thanks for bringing that in. And I'm guessing, if they were successful, they were also very successful at learning the domain, and learning what they needed to know, but they didn't carry that baggage in with them, right from day one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Okay, I got one more here. And I'm going to just sort of linger on this idea a little bit. Product discovery. I used the term early on when I was talking about the product operating model. A lot of new product managers, especially, will hear about product discovery, and it's this awesome breath of fresh air, right? It's about ways we can talk to our customer. It's about how we really make that the driving force within our week. How do we get out of the building? How do we create prototypes and validate our ideas, and just all of these wonderful techniques? And it is, don't get me wrong, it's fantastic. It is really one of the most important aspects of modern product development. The problem is people who hear this the first time want to make it into a recipe. And they expect that, okay, I don't know what the answer is. There's a lot of risk here. I'm going to run some product discovery experiments, and the answer is going to materialize. It's going to be, it's going to be obvious once I go through this. And the problem with this is it does not work this way. Product discovery is not a way to put your judgment to the side, right? Product discovery is actually the way that you inform your judgment. Teresa Torres says this very well. So she's another product thinker. She is really what we generally describe as a discovery coach. So she works with a lot of teams kind of on the ground, who are working through these sorts of things. And I think her wording of this is just perfect. It's not a formula. You can't expect an answer to come out of this. Really, when I see this as a pathology, right, when I see this as a misconception, it's teams that are spending too much time just doing slight variations of something that they had done before, hoping that some magical answer is going to materialize. In some cases it does, but it often doesn't. And really, when we look at this more from this point of view, we've got to right size our product discovery based on the specific risks. We've got to right size what we do based on the level of confidence that we need. Is it enough to have an opinion? Maybe we go forward with no product discovery, or do we need some qualitative validation from, a handful of customers? Okay, that's a set of tools there. Or do we actually need quantitative, statistically significant proof that this is actually going to work when we roll it out the way that we're planning to roll it out? Not everything falls, into the same bin there. So we have to, as product managers, use our judgment on this. And this is often one of the hardest lessons to learn, especially when you don't have confidence in your judgment. So use product discovery. It is a wonderful set of tools, but it's not going to do your job for you. All right, those are the 5. I'm realizing I might have had time for a 6th one, but I'll go ahead and close out here and just say, you can find, if you're interested in Silicon Valley Product Group or this type of content, we have a lot of articles. We've been at this for quite some time. There's also a regular newsletter you can sign up for if you're looking for information on this. Also, please don't hesitate to reach out to me if there's anything I can answer for you. There's my email and my LinkedIn. And with that, I will yield the balance of my time to question and answers.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. That was super insightful. In fact, we've gotten a couple of appreciations come through as well. So just wanted to share those with you. And then we've got a good question from Sajad. So domains can be very complex for PMs as they start into their new roles. How can one strategize their domain learning and accelerate it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this is in a company that's really doing this well. This is on the manager, right? That if you're a product manager in this situation, your manager should be working with you on this. They are going to be constantly assessing where your knowledge is and helping you figure that stuff out. So, for example, you might come into a new job and you're trying to learn a domain. If I'm your manager, one of the things I'm going to ensure is that you're meeting with a lot of customers, maybe 15, 20, 30, in your first several weeks, just to make sure that you're up to speed on that. I'm going to ensure that you know where the product data is and how to interpret it. I'm going to ensure that you are forming the right sorts of relationships with the stakeholders in the company, the people who maybe are really concerned about some of the nuances of the domain. Maybe it's regulatory concerns. For example, you might be in healthcare and you're in a highly regulated space. Relationships with the lawyers and the keepers of those sorts of regulations. So the manager's job is really important on this. Now, if your manager is not really there and doesn't really have your back, then I think focusing yourself, figuring out how you get exposure to customers is probably the most important one. And then understanding that product data is the second most important one. We do have a few resources on the website on kind of how to assess yourself as a product manager. If you just look at the assessment, there's a follow-up article called The Plan, and those will give you some places to really focus. But those would probably be the 2.
Desi, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, so a question that came in from LinkedIn, maybe out of scope for today, but do you have a view on outcomes and related metrics? So maybe if you can put that in the context of perhaps misconceptions about outcomes and related metrics, that would be great.
Yeah, let's see. So I guess one of the hallmarks of the product model is that we're trying to drive teams much more on outcomes. And what an outcome is, it can be anything, right? It can be the obvious business stuff. We need more customers, we need more revenue, we need to reduce costs, but they can be things that are a bit more subtle. We need to drive adoption of this particular aspect of something, right? Those are the types of things that we're trying to get teams much more organized around. I'd say probably the most common way that this misconception plays out is they look at things like OKRs and they say, okay, if we get OKRs, if we can roll OKRs out to our teams, then we're going to be outcome oriented. Look, it's right there in the name, right? We've got our objective and then we've got our key results. Oftentimes, though, when those OKRs are stated, they're really stated in terms that are just like we've always done it. The KR is we're going to ship this by that date, and we're going to ship this other thing by that date. Those are not really outcomes. That really still is output. To find the opposite there. So to orient this again around the question itself, this is a fundamental aspect. The best teams are really driving much more toward outcomes than output. And one misconception is teams sort of misapplying the techniques of outcomes, and ultimately ending up right back where they started.
Gotcha. All right. One question from my side. So, you talked about these product misconceptions, the way people think about engineering teams, the way people think about design teams. And at least from what I've seen, there's very few companies that get all of these and get it done right. I'm curious, from your interaction with over 200 companies, why is there such a hesitation to kind of adopt these, and not kind of go down the same path as Google's
Yeah.
gone?
Yeah. So we were talking in the pre-session a little bit about just kind of transformation. Companies that are trying to move from an old model to a new model, and the new model includes the things that we've been talking about with outcomes and how you cross-functionally collaborate, and really a lot of it has to do with empowering the teams to come up with the best solutions. And there are a number of reasons why things get sort of stuck in the old models. But I'm going to put it down to probably two of the main ones. The first one is that there is a low level of trust between the broader product organization, which includes product management, design, engineering, analytics. There's a deep level of trust between that group and the rest of the company. Whether or not the rest of the company trusts that group can get it done. And in some cases, that lack of trust is well-founded. The teams have not been able to perform. They don't know how to collaborate. They don't know how to deal with customers. So that's a big one. The second one is a little bit more sort of tangible, and it actually has to do with funding and how budgets are allocated and how funding is allocated. And in traditional models, somebody makes a case and a project gets greenlighted, and that green light basically results in a team getting formed, and that team is very much organized around a particular idea that's happened high up in the organization. It's very difficult for many companies to move away from that because it gets all the way into the finance department. So that's probably the other reason, is it goes all the way back to the funding model that's managed by people who are very, very far from the product development process. So to do a full transformation, you have to get into that as well.
Okay. Awesome. So Chris, you were kind enough to give us a little bit more time for questions, and we've got a couple more questions come in. So not sure if this whole thing is going to show up on the screen, but maybe I can read it out. So author says, 100% agree that discovery isn't a formula, and it's really a tool that lets you make better decisions, as cited by Teresa. So who typically should be part of the discovery efforts? Is it just the PM? And does discovery look different from product to product? And I guess maybe a question within that question, how do you differentiate good discovery habits from poor ones?
Yeah, it's a massive question, and actually, kind of half one of our workshops describes, a lot of this stuff. But the first part of the question is that it's cross-functional, actually. So if you've got a cross-functional team, there's a product manager, there's a collection of engineers. Ideally, there's a product designer that's with that team as well. All of those people can actually be involved in discovery. Importantly, we do need a cross-functional audience there. At the very least, it's your product manager, your designer, and maybe the tech lead on that team. And each one of those people is representing a slightly different aspect of the problem. So the product manager is focusing very much on, is there value in this? Like, are we really convinced that we're delivering value to customers and users? The product manager is also concerned with viability. Is this going to work for our business? Does it? Are the numbers lining up financially? Can we actually sell it? Is it going to work with the sales department? Is it compliant with regulations or whatever our governance requirements are? So that's really the role that the product manager is playing. Product designer is playing the role of the experience. How is this experienced by users, and actually in some cases by buyers as well? And then the tech lead and the broader engineering team speaks to the feasibility. What is it going to take to build it this way? Is there a better idea, something that might be easier or more effective? So all of those people have to come together in product discovery. Does it look different from product to product? Absolutely. And it can look different from product team to product team. You may think of just something as simple as, is this a pre-product market fit product? We're moving from 0 to 1, on something, versus something that's been out for a while. And yes, we're making innovations on it and optimizations on it, but it's the cash cow. We've got thousands of customers on it, and it's generating revenue. So the profile of discovery is going to look very different. Both teams will have it, but the amount and the nature of it is going to be very different. And good discovery habits from poor ones, there are many, many facets to this. I guess if I were to hit a couple of points on good discovery habits, one is that discovery is treated as a continuous process. It's something that's happening all the time. It's not something that is a big phase. We've got our discovery phase and we've got our delivery phase. The habit is there that it's always going on in some form or another. Let's see. The other really good discovery habit is teams that are actively on the lookout for confirmation bias. That they are going out doing discovery, where they admit it or not. Confirmation bias means you're kind of looking for the thing that you already believe. Good teams are in a place to be surprised, and they're thrilled by that surprise. Actually, I'll give you one more attribute of good discovery habits. How many ideas are you killing, right? How many ideas just we're going to either stop or we're going to dramatically pivot based on what we learn in product discovery? If that is anything lower than 50%, you're probably not there. And usually you're killing far, far more than 50%.
Yeah.
Big question, big answer.
Yeah, that last example actually kind of reminded me, I think it was Google Labs X, something like that. They'd actually started an initiative where if you came up with the idea and you could actually kill that idea, they'd give you'd actually get a bonus for that, right? So
Yeah.
that made sure that the good ones filtered through, because you'd really be kind of extensive in trying to make sure that you're validating your idea. Wondering,
it puts a different spin on failure, right? When you celebrate, and I'll put failure in ironic air quotes there, but when you celebrate discovering that an idea is not going to work, and you can really articulate clearly why this idea is not going to work and why we should abandon it, that should be that's a wonderful moment. You've just saved the company a huge amount of time and resource doing something that ultimately wasn't going to work, and you figured it out really quickly and cheaply.
right on. Wondering if we got time for one more question. I do feel it is relevant to the times. So in your
Sure.
extensive experience dealing with product development, could you identify and discuss some of the biggest challenges and opportunities product teams face when navigating platform shifts? So AI-driven platform shift being the current example.
Boy, that is a giant question. Yeah, I mean, I guess probably if I were to boil it down, it comes down to that whole innovator's dilemma situation. It's particularly difficult for existing companies, existing products, existing success, existing revenue streams, because oftentimes these platform shifts involve disrupting your own stuff. I think that's one that you definitely have to be aware of. The forces on a successful company are, they start to look really quarter to quarter. We've got to make these numbers, or we've got to hit these growth targets. And it's often much, much easier to continue to milk the thing that's out there than to contemplate the dramatic shift, the dramatic change in how you're going to do things. So I'll leave it at that. I think there's much, much more that can be plumbed in that. And I agree with you. That is probably the most timely question these days. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Awesome. Perhaps something we can, tackle in a future session. So, Chris, that was an incredibly insightful session on behalf of our product community and the Product Soch team. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for joining us. Hope you have a great day.
Thanks all.